Well, welcome to the Emblazers show, the show for B2B revenue leaders igniting revenue. My name is Amanda. I'm your host, and I am joined today by what some might call the Beethoven of buying messaging. Tim, it's so good to see you. Back
Yeah.
on video, not in person. Womp womp.
Yeah, right. We had that opportunity to see everybody, each other, and then everybody who joined us in Denver a couple weeks back for the Revenue Summit by Emblaze. 600 of our closest friends. It was awesome.
600 of my closest friends. I don't know about you. It's been a couple weeks now. I'm still feeling high from that trip.
Was it because it was in Denver?
Because apparently it really is like 6,000 feet above sea level, and like that's a real
not
thing.
the high part I was talking about. I was sorry. I went there.
You went there. Anyway, well, it's good to see you. And I will say, we've gotten such tremendous feedback from attendees, sponsors, really all the sessions, but like day one, we had like an intense amount of it's like great keynotes, great panels. Any highlights, like right off the bat for those of that weren't able to join? Like you would say, sorry, you missed out on this.
It's main stage. Everybody's in there, so there's just a lot of good energy. And yeah, we tried to pick the main stage content very carefully. I'll begin with the end. So we closed the first day. I think just the mere presence of this gentleman kind of was like, the room was like, oh, we got that. So I had a fireside chat with Nelson Griggs, the president of Nasdaq. And my favorite story from that, other than he just provided some real wisdom and sage advice for uncertain times, is that he was going to do a keynote, and the week before the event, he's like, I can't even put a presentation together because everything's changing by the hour.
Right.
He's like, can we just do a fireside chat, and I'll answer to the best of my knowledge in terms of where we are at and that day and that hour. And that's what he did. And even subsequent to the event, like, things have changed and they're super dynamic. And what I just appreciated is he's like, great companies will continue to be great companies if they just keep doing the things that made them great, and not overreact or course correct too quickly, because everything is fluid and changing. And it just reminds you that underlying the economy and even our global community and our businesses are some principles that are unchanging. And I appreciated him, even being in the place he sits, having such a perspective.
Well, and you've been good friends for a really long time.
Yeah.
So clearly we know who was paying a little bit more attention in school than not.
Yeah. I joked when he came on, like, I met him at a company 25 years ago when I was the head of strategy, and he was just an individual quota carrying sales rep. And I'm still the head of strategy, and now he's the president of Nasdaq. So, one of us is an overachiever. And so, but hey, he was at our event.
True that. And I do not envy that gentleman's job whatsoever. And at listening to him, it was just so incredible. And he's so down to earth, and he makes everything he does seem so simple, and that's a special talent. But he's made this comment, and I wrote it down. It's a sticky note that I have now on my desk. He said, every crisis is an opportunity. Lean into your strengths, listen to your clients, and innovate. And he added the reference to that, like, I think one of the folks in the audience had asked, just advice on how to deal with this uncertain times. And he's like, basically treat right now, at least here in the Americas, as if it's COVID times. We've been through it before. You know how to react to it. Now, could that change tomorrow? Maybe. I don't know. I'm not in his position, but I found those two sort of points very insightful, like the ahas for me, while he was talking.
Yeah, the idea that in uncertain times, the most certain thing you have is your current customers. And if you're looking for new customers, they're probably not as prone to move right now to solve the same problem. But if you can find a new problem, that's an opportunity. And so, yeah, I mean, easier said than done. But a good set of thinking questions for the time we had.
Yeah, agreed. Well, and then in the morning, we had an amazing panel of CXOs that you confidently joined the stage and you threw them some ringer of questions. What were some of your highlights there?
Well, it's funny when you look at why sales leaders come to an event like this and you ask them, one of the things we keep hearing is that there's so much indecision out there. And the indecision tends to stop at the highest level of authority and decision making because they're like, do we need to decide this or can we defer it? And is there an alternative we need to do first? And so the question really became for sales leaders, how do we get access to the C-suite? And how do we overcome indecision? And the three panelists that we had for fans or fan of the podcast, I don't know, I hope you're all listening.
There's more than 6. I can tell you that. There's more than 6.
That if you want to go back to previous episodes, check out Rohail Khan and Preston Polk episodes. They were 2 of the 3 people on our main stage talking as C-suite executives, making decisions and sharing some of the same wisdom they shared on the podcast, but now to the whole room. And the thing that just really jumped out at me was the audience's reaction to like, oh, C-level people are real human beings. And they did. They talk like human beings who really are the most worried about risk. And that's a very emotional thing. We think C-suite people are rational, logical, which they are to a degree, but they're just regular humans, mostly emotional. And the one trigger for them is risk. They can't delegate risk. And that came through in every answer that they gave is like, if you could take risk away, or if I start negotiating hard with you, you start showing me where you'll be willing to give me back some risk. It all circled the idea that the thing they care about the most is risk to their organization. How can they get rid of it? How can they give it to you? Ideally is really kind of the answer. There's assume my risk. Not only like try to get rid of the risk in general, but can you assume some of it for me? That's valuable.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting because talk of the town still is AI. And look, it only took me 7 minutes and 42 seconds to say the word AI. But coming into this, a lot of the feedback we had gotten from previous attendees is like, hey, we AI. Like that was the whole big buzz. But like while yes, that was a focus on like, let's talk about the technology, let's like talk about case studies of how people are implementing it and the whole 9 yards, it was still the topics were still very distinctively human. We were still focusing on the human. And so you kicked off day 1 with a keynote, which by the way was very good. The irreplaceable value of humans. Highlights on that, because it was very impactful.
Well, when you're staring at 600 humans, you're not going to start a speech with "You're no longer needed."
But thanks for coming to Summit.
Yeah, right. Yeah, next year we'll just have AI bots sitting here. No, I mean you're looking at people who are, yes, they want to know how they can leverage AI, and we had plenty of that content. But the thought in my mind was, let's kick it off with some encouragement that says, here are those things that are distinctly human that only you can do, that frankly your clients still care about in terms of the experiences they have in the buying and selling process. And using our buyer feedback, the big database that we have of like 150,000 wins and losses, real feedback from real people who made real decisions, we've been able to isolate the 8 experiences that they have that are predictive of wins and losses, meaning they can observe them, they can score them, they can compare you to the competition and give you feedback on how you're doing in creating the experiences that matter to them. And those experiences were all, the 8 that bubble to the top of the list here were things that only the humans could accomplish. And so I think they were like, I can grab on to these things. If I can master these things, I'm going to still be relevant to the whole process. I'm going to be really important to the customer. And there are things that only I can do that at this point, AI can't replicate. So I think that people want to know it. but they don't want it to be just sort of a nice thing. Like it's okay. You're going to be fine. Pat, pat, pat on the head. It's going to be like, you're going to be fine because if you do these things, the buyers say it matters. And so do them well and it should work out for you. And I think people appreciated the encouragement and the specificity.
Dynamic revenue growth leaders know that Emblaze is the leadership insights community for them.
As the world of sales is constantly evolving and constantly changing, I think it's even more critical to get together with people to understand how are they helping to solve some of the problems that our buyers have today.
We always find a lot of value in the partnerships that we're able to form with some of the other great organizations that are part of the team here. And personally, I love the opportunity to connect with my peer group outside at other organizations and learn from them and try to figure out if there's things that they're doing that we can pull into our organization and benefit from.
Go to emblazegrowth.com/join and start your free Insights membership. Take control of your revenue future today.
Yeah, I mean, it was what you shared was a super powerful message. And then I think about we had the two doctors on stage, right? Dr. Leff Bonney, Dr. Carmen Simon, who, shared some like latest research. So Dr. Leff, he doesn't like to be called doctor. Leff Bonney, he shared, insights on how to stand out in a saturated market. Carmen dove deeper into active listing and what that actually means for sellers. What were some of your aha moments in what they had to share?
Yeah, I loved how their latest research carried the theme of distinctly human through. Because these things, differentiation wasn't about how do you differentiate your solution, it's how you differentiate yourself. And if you can differentiate yourself, that will be the differentiation. His research was so interesting, not enough time to go into it, so we got to get him back. But the conclusion was essentially this, that all sellers are raising their game in terms of being good at running a sales cycle. But the thing that will distinguish them is not their ability to run a good sales cycle. It was their ability to be different personally. And when a seller did something different personally, the perception that they were a better seller and the perception that their product was better was amazing. And so what it was really interesting is when sellers told the exact same story, but one did it differently, they believed the product was better, even though it was the exact same story. And they believed the seller was better, even though they are essentially, again, telling the same story. So what it said is that products are important, but the difference is the story you tell and the skill with which you tell it. And that is distinctly human. So that was Leff's sort of aha. And he specifically talked about two skills, curiosity and creativity. And I really glommed onto that there's room in B2B selling for me to be different by using things that we thought you should check at the door. Curiosity, no, let's just talk about like speeds and feeds. And creativity, let's do something with a bit of flourish. I love that. Being fabulous is in vogue for my B2B. It's awesome. And then speaking of fabulous, Dr. Carmen Simon gets up there and just sort of mesmerizes people. She's like a Pied Piper. And she talked about active listening, and we were all actively listening. And the thing that really stood out to me is we all know we should be actively listening. But what does that mean? She broke it down into 4 types of active listening, and then she studied the 4 types. So it was like affirmation and empathy, and then it was elaboration and insights. And what she found is that not all active listening is good active listening. Some active listening doesn't work as well. In fact, the affirmation, nodding and agreeing, and empathizing, saying you're not alone, those feel faked, forced, and actually resulted in negative responses from the buyer. But elaboration, like expanding on and adding some value to the thought, and then insights, connecting their thoughts to something else that might help them think about it in a new or a fresh or a different way. Those 2 worked, insights and elaboration, but affirmation and empathy didn't. So sometimes we go into active listening assuming we know what it means, and then we do it, and we could be doing it wrong. The other thing is we could be doing too much of it, actually. That was the other thing. She's like, active listening in moderation, please, for both the seller and the buyer because of the fatigue and how much processing it requires. It starts to actually, after a certain point, it tips in a not positive direction. So what I found interesting was, here's a very soft skill that everybody says you should have. She gave us very hard, specific examples of what kind works, what kind doesn't, and how much you need of both. So Emblaze will be producing those results for people. So stay tuned for all the things that were said by Leff and Carmen coming out as reports from Emblaze.
Yeah, and I only listened to half of what you just said there. And so
I was waiting for elaboration. I was waiting for some insight, but I got nothing.
you know what? In full, I mean, obviously I can see myself as we're recording, right? And it's like I nod a lot, and it's always been this thing. Like you just nod because you're, showing the other person that you're paying attention. And like half the time well, at least for me, it's like I spend a lot of time thinking, how am I going to react to that individual, not actually spending the time to listen to add some additional thought. So Carmen always is mesmerizing, and she makes uber complicated things so easy to understand. It was really great to have her on stage. And we sort of rounded the afternoon with a tremendous CRO panel, our CRO panel. It was
Get
great.
our seats mixed up, yes.
I know, right? Sona, Jepson, Jenny, they've been podcast guests on our show as well. And as long with Cindy and Ken on the stage with them this time around, what was a big takeaway that you heard from this group of folks?
Yeah, I think it's interesting, right, to have the CXOs who make the buying decisions, and then in the morning, and then in the afternoon, the CROs who are in charge of making the sellers relevant to the buyers. We called it a view from the hot seat, and Ken was quick to say, but that seat is poised on a trap door.
Right.
And that this job has the highest turnover of any in the C-suite, which in some ways makes total sense. But it just reminds you why it's a hot seat and why it might be poised on a trap door. But what was most interesting to me is like everything they talked about wasn't necessarily about the number. It was all the systems that they need to put in place to create scalable pipeline and growth, and the talent and the tools and the processes, and how important all of those decisions are, sort of that ecosystem, the commercial ecosystem, that the number at some point then takes care of itself. And it was just the broad purview that they own and are responsible for, and how seriously they take all the elements of it, from the marketing and upstream marketing, demand gen, and flow through to pipeline and closed, and then the flow through to customer success, retention, and expansion. Their purview is huge, and they take seriously how all of those things interrelate with each other. So the tearing down of those silos, and as a CRO, bringing those things together in a continuous experience for the buyer and for the company to efficiently and effectively continue to market, sell, keep, and grow. That was fascinating to hear that from their seats as they try to bridge those gaps and pull those things together and stitch them. It was just interesting to hear that from people actually doing it. What's hard, what's working, and where they're, what needs to happen next. And I got tremendous feedback on that. I don't know if our room was filled with CROs who could relate, or people who want to be CROs who now had a clearer picture of what it would take. But either way, the panel was really helpful to the audience, it seemed.
I agree. And Jenny and Sona on their episodes, previous episodes, so if you're just tuning in, make sure you look at those previous episodes when we had those ladies on. They really take a deeper dive into how they've built the right teams and the qualifications behind that, and so they do a deeper dive into that. So it's well worth the time to listen to those episodes.
I realize how just smart we are right now, how well we planned our podcast episodes. That if you miss the conference and you're listening to us and you're like, you guys are lame because you're giving me like an inch deep worth of insight. What the main part of this podcast is to say, go listen to these other podcasts. That's, there you go. Worth the price of admission today.
Right. Well, on that note, Tim, it's great to see you. And I'm going to say thanks for listening. Make sure you like, subscribe, give us 5 stars, share with your friends if you're enjoying this podcast. We'd love to have you do that. And with
We'd
that,
love to know.
we want you to come hang out with us. But be sure to check out some upcoming episodes. You're going to be in for a real treat. And until next time, it's good to see you.